Hey, good evening, Hope Covenant Church. Welcome to Stump the Pastor. We missed you all last week, but it is nice to be back this week with you guys. We have some cool questions already sort of in the hopper, but as always, you can ask questions live in the comments on Facebook, and we love to sort of tackle those in the moment. Usually trip me up more than John, but he will bring the wisdom, and we'll go from there. So, and I think are we moving to every other week for now?
Yeah, I think we may. I think it depends on how many questions we have come in. So we're always looking to keep things fresh, enjoy our time with each of you, but also we don't want to limit what we do based on our time, but we also don't want to limit based on like, hey, this is getting a little stale. So, right. Phil, I think we'll come up with something. If we're not doing this every week, we'll come up with something to do on the off weeks.
Yes, and next week is the election, so we'll probably take that night off either way, except maybe to pray for peace.
It would be an interesting Stump the Pastor of like who did you vote for? You know what I mean? That would be who did you vote for and why? That would be a good one. Or just generally just live tweeting, but like live streaming.
Yeah, like live streaming our reactions to what's going on.
Yeah.
Hey, Jennifer. Hey, Bambi. Well, you are welcome, and we are glad that you guys are here. Well, with that, let's go ahead and jump into the first question, which has to do with Halloween, which is, when is Halloween?
I think it's this weekend, yeah.
Is that Saturday?
Friday?
Is it the 31st every year? It's the last day, right?
Yeah, I think, well, today's Tuesday is the 27th. So that would be 28th would be Wednesday, 29th would be Friday, or Thursday, 30th would be, so Saturday. Saturday is Halloween.
And this year you get a special COVID surprise with your candy. So be careful.
Hey, you know what just came up on my timeline? I've had this cat for a year.
Wow, that's hard to believe.
Yeah, I know. Okay, so should we put up?
Yeah, so this is a question someone sent in about Christianity and Halloween. Should we celebrate? What is kind of the relationship between these things? And I could give a very long-winded answer, but I'll try not to go on too long on this one. But to me, one of the questions that people need to be, I guess it's a good question to ask, but then there's a second question that must follow. So how something began is interesting and important. However, things change over time. New meaning gets ascribed to things as time goes on. So I look at something even like sacrifice in the Bible. Well, Abraham sacrificed most likely to other gods before he sacrificed to Yahweh. So when God called him to sacrifice, it was already an established thing in the world, but God sort of redefined it. And so Halloween, whatever the sort of historical reference, I mean, even Christmas, right? The history of Christmas is not really necessarily a Christian thing, but we've redefined it to be, because Jesus was probably born in like April, right? So like we celebrate at the wrong time of year, but we've redefined it. And I would say with Halloween, kind of the same thing is true, that basically, and I was in the gaming industry for a little bit, and so we would go to these conventions and everyone did what's called cosplay, which is costume playing. And so people would dress up like the Flash or Zelda. Deadpool was a really popular one recently. I even saw the Christmas Vacation, National Lampoon's Christmas, Uncle Eddie, when he's in the bathrobe outside, there was a guy dressed with a bathrobe with Uncle Eddie with the hose, right? So it's cosplay. And so basically Halloween, whatever its origins, has basically become National Cosplay Day. Like, it has no other meaning than National Cosplay Day, where people give each other candy. Now, could other people ascribe other meanings to it? Of course, but that's anything in life. You can take anything and twist it to be something else. So I would say if you're using it to worship Satan, no, not a good thing. But I would say that's not just Halloween. I would say anything you're using to worship or play around with demonic forces would be bad. But Halloween in and of itself, I think, is a day for people to dress up. And I would say, therefore, the cultural meaning has shifted.
Yeah.
So that's the short answer.
I would agree with that. I would simply piggyback on it to say that.
Sorry, I like the comment in the quotes. That's a good one. If you're using it to worship Satan, probably not good.
Yeah, this is StreamYard, guys. Advertising for here. Hang on a second.
Yeah, can you put it up as a quote on the screen?
I'm gonna powered by StreamYard right here. Advertising for StreamYard. StreamYard allows us to do so much more with this than previously able. So yes, but can I show it? Yeah, I can.
That's perfect. I love it. Love it.
So so I would go. I'm not going to take it a step further. I'm going to simply say that the origins of Halloween are Christian in nature. So All Hallows Eve, hallowed, all holy, hallowed. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. So holy is your name. Can
I say something right there?
Yeah, go, jump in.
I'm going to interrupt because when I was a kid, that line, our Father who art in heaven, I didn't understand the word art. And I thought as a child we're saying our Father who aren't in heaven. And I was so concerned.
Man, that's another quote. Our Father who aren't in heaven.
Yeah, I'm like, why would Jesus tell us to say this? Someone has got it wrong. There's a mistranslation here.
Yeah, so
anyway, you continue.
So the concept of being hallowed, right? So All Hallows Eve is the name of Halloween. That's what we've derived it. That's the derivative form of All Hallows Eve. And All Hallows Eve comes from the evening before All Saints Day, which Matt asked us what day is after Halloween today. It's just a classic 4-year-old question. I think what he was looking for was Thanksgiving, which holiday is that?
And then
but he
Christmas.
said, which day is after Halloween? And I was like, it's All Saints Day, right? So really, that's the origins of it, are that we are hallowing. That is the day before we honor the saints or the believers who have died before. So I guess my feeling is that, this idea that it became Satan worship or demonic, like, I just don't see it, right? Like, I don't see it in culture. Honestly, I think the taking of Christian traditions and applying to them secular meaning is less Christian than the taking of basically secularized holidays and like being goofy and dressing up. Now, plenty of stuff happens on Halloween that you don't really like. People TP each other's houses and throw eggs at people and prank each other. Like, these are not necessarily Christian ideals, right? But there's also
unless it's done in love.
Unless it's done in love, right? But there's also this element. If you ask me, what am I more concerned about as a pastor? Kids dressing up on Halloween as Fortnite characters and Minecraft characters and going door to door, or the consumeristic nature takeover of Christmas. I would say the consumeristic takeover of Christmas is way higher on my priority list of threats to the church than this kind of abstract idea of we're worshiping the devil. I don't see it. Maybe I grew up too Christian and I just that was never a part of my thing. I think that we like to be scared. I think that part of this weird thing that it is to be human, the human condition, is that we like a little bit of fear to keep us just kind of coming back for more. And I have a lot of really fond Halloween memories dressing up like a gorilla and sitting on my front porch and scaring people and then thanking me for it, right? Like they were like, yeah, this is like what we come out for. We come out to be spooked. So I think that there's an innocent nature to it. You know, I'm sure that like somewhere out there, like Franklin Graham and John Piper and some of these other guys are like just losing it as I'm saying this. But ultimately, like I just don't think it's that big of a deal. But I think it's a good question though, because like this is I think it's cosplay day, right? So yeah, it's a good question. I'm not knocking the question at all. No. I think that there's just so much less there than we like it to be. You know, Christians love to get offended.
I know. And, you know, I would also say along with that, a very biblical concept in Halloween is gleaning. So they're kind of gleaning candy from other people. So maybe we need to call it Gleaning Candy Day.
Well, right. I mean, that is.
And you leave some candy for the kids who have no money to buy it for themselves. So they glean from ours.
Right. This is like, Gleaning Candy Day, you know, during the harvest is like totally a part of that. Right.
Right. Yeah. So we're teaching them that importance.
I just don't like, I think that I think that kind of the most interesting part of this question to me, because the wonderful thing is, right, we haven't had any more questions jump in. We have one more to get to, but nobody's jumping on. So please add questions to the comments so that we don't ramble on about things or beat dead horses, because we just have time to. But you know,
not because it's Halloween, just because.
Yeah, if I'm going to beat this dead horse, I would say that holidays like Halloween remind me that Christians love to be offended about things for the sake of feeling persecuted when we live in a country that we control. There's this idea like that we're losing the country. Like, no, like we control the courts, we control that, like we are in power. Christians in general are in power. And so there's this idea of like anything that's potentially suspect or not of Christian origin in our culture, Christians just love to throw their hands up and clutch their pearls and say like, oh, we're being persecuted because kids are getting candy. When in reality, like, get over it. Like, yeah, that's my perspective.
No, I hear you. And
I'm a heretic.
I think that basic fear is really interesting to me, but another concept to beat it further, you know, one of the core biblical concepts of the whole Bible is the reconciliation and redemption of all things. And there are very few things.
Phil. You better preach, Phil.
We need a car horn now to keep our Sunday.
Like, I would be on my car horn right now.
Thank you.
Of all things. I'm picking up what you're putting down.
But really, I mean, there's very few things in the world that aren't redemptive. You know, there's things like pornography and such that aren't really like of redeemable, but underneath it, sex is redeemable, right? Like there are things a part of it that are redeemable. And I think when people wholesale write something off, and we're basically saying there's nothing in there that can be redeemed, there's nothing that's true in there. All truth is God's truth. So if there's something good in it, I think we can claim that. And so I think that's tangential to what we're talking about. But at the same time, there's so much goodness to dressing up and just having fun and getting candy that I think is redeemable.
Well, and exactly. I think that when we there's like this funny thing that happens on Halloween where like a lot of high schoolers trick or treat these days, and people are always like, "Go home! Like you shouldn't be out here trick or treating." And I'm like, of all the things that you are worried about high schoolers doing, coming to your door for candy is at the top of the list.
Yeah.
Yeah. So no. I think that there is something redeemable about it, for sure.
Well, on the topic of high school kids, let's go to the next one, which is a question about raising kids, right, in the faith. And So I can read the exact question. What advice would you give to parents based on experience to help kids cultivate an active and vibrant faith as teens/young adults? Now I have one major point to sort of make with this, but you at Hope Covenant take on the pastor for high school and teens as well. So I'm going to let you start because you have more. My kids are obviously only 3 and 5, so I don't have a lot of direct experience with high school students. However, I do know some things that will absolutely make a difference, but I think I'm going to let you take it first.
Yeah. So, first thing, everybody's doing the best they can with what they have. Okay. That's just, that could be the theme of every one of my sermons. Everybody is doing the best they can with what they have, with what they've been given. So when people, in the very, very rare cases where you have someone who seems truly evil and there's no reason for that, there's no traceable reason for that behavior. Rick, we do see your question. We'll jump on that next. Almost always, if not always, there is a mental health issue at play. So everybody's doing the best they can with what they have, which means parents, your kids are doing the best they can with what they have. And that means that sometimes, and you're doing the best you can with what you have. So sometimes kids are just going to grow up in such a way where they're going to wander and or stray from faith earlier or later. If your kid never strays from faith ever, then your kid does not own their own faith. That's so just own that. I'm not saying that high school is too late or too early to go through a level of deconstruction and questioning and doubting. But if your child never doubts and questions and deconstructs, then your child does not own their own faith. They are simply accepting what you've told them, and they have not taken ownership of it at a deep level. Yeah, that's okay. Some people don't take ownership at a deep level until they're 50 years old. Some people until they're 70 years old. Some people on their deathbed finally are able to deconstruct and then reconstruct a faith that's their own. So I've seen it. I mean, as a chaplain. So that's just to get that out of the way. The second thing is that kids high schoolers tend to be just really loud versions of what's modeled to them. So like I've had high schoolers who are like super, super progressive or super, super conservative and like wear all of the paraphernalia, right? Like the Bernie Sanders, all this stuff, whatever, the signs, and then the Trump and the Make America Great and all that. And most of the time they don't have any concept of what that means, right? Like just as an example, they're just mirroring what they're seeing at home and then making that extremely loud because that's what high schoolers do. They take whatever you give them and they magnify it. So if you lie to them, they will magnify your lie and become an amazing liar, pathologically amazing liar. If you yell at them, they will yell 3 times more than you yell at them at you. If you have unhealthy rhythms where you don't fight and you avoid conflict at all times, your child will do that in a loud way. They will become an extreme version of that. So most of the time what I see with high schoolers is that if your parents are in church, if your parents are participating in kind of all aspects of the life of the church, if your parents are taking time to do personal devotional time on their own, not necessarily broadcasting that to their kids, if your parents are good as far as tithing or not necessarily tithing, but giving to the church, and they loop in.
I'm liking what you're saying.
You're honking.
I'm honking.
Car horn.
Yes.
So they're just going to do that, right? They're just going to take that and they're going to reflect that back in a loud way. So, Sometimes they rebel from it. Most of the time, they're just going to reflect back what they're experiencing. And so that, the kids that I've experienced that are really, really faith-driven tend to come from homes where their parents are faith-driven, and exploring and questioning and inviting their kids into that space, versus trying to hold that. And that's really difficult for me because I don't want my kid to necessarily be a pastor, right? That's not like something that's like, people have been like, oh, do you hope that your kids grow up and be pastors? And I'm like, no, not really. Like I want them to do what they're going to do. And if being a pastor works for them, so I tend to be like the worst at parenting my children in the faith, right? Because I'm like, you're getting it from all sides from me.
We have to be really careful.
Right. Like you're getting it from me in heavy doses all the time. Like Matt says frequently, like when we go to church, Dad's the one who stands up and talks, other than or Pastor Phil. That's what he says, or Pastor Phil. But that's his understanding. So he listens to his dad say all this stuff. So at home, I try and not like shove that down his throat, because he's getting it from me other places.
It's too much.
So that's like you can do it too much. But I think if you just live your life in a way as a parent, if you live your life in a way, and again, I don't have kids that are old enough for me to like say that this is like a tested hypothesis, but in my experience, the family is like the church chair's kid, we don't have the church chair's kid is not a kid in our youth group, so I can say that. But like the kids whose parents are showing up every week to church and serving in roles and asking to go deeper, those are the kids who are asking to go deeper. It's social ability, personal character, whatever, all that different stuff, like personality, doesn't really have a play in it, to be honest. Like some of the kids that are the quietest, their parents are loud, but they're quiet, but they still model what their parents' priorities are. So, and then the goal is, by the way, the goal of youth ministry is simply to give kids enough positive reinforcement as they interact with their own thoughts and faith journey, that they choose to continue to do that as a lifelong practice, as a rule of life. Not to indoctrinate kids into a certain set of theological principles or dogmatic kind of religiosity, because that's really dumb, because our theology is going to change. So everything in our world changes so quickly that if I think that my theological framework that I understand in 2020 is going to be the theological framework that any of these kids experience in 2050, like I'm wrong. So all I want them to do is be able to think critically. And question well and ask the right questions, then they'll be good. Like that's my goal. So even within the question of like, how do we have faithful teens, or how are they like loving their neighbor and doing these things? Like I'm actually less concerned about that than I am the kids being good at asking tough questions, because I think a lot of that stuff comes later.
Dude, I learned something. That was awesome. It reminds me, people who know me know I've brought this up before, but it reminds me of like Caesar Milan. Like people have these problems with their dogs, and so they think the problem is the dog, and Caesar Milan is always like, no, it's the owner. And it's the same thing with like Super Nanny. Oh, this kid is out of control. And what does she do? She always works on the parent, right? So I love that, because you're saying like, rather than thinking about the teen, it's sort of like you got to reflect on yourself. I think that's really good. And I liked what you said at the end too. One thing that I've heard from people in conversations, or a lot in reading and people's sort of story of faith, a lot of people who sort of walked away from the faith were, in my opinion, at least in my experience, people who asked questions and the church stifled those questions rather than inviting mystery and exploration and tension. Because I can tell you, as someone who was a scientist and like still loves science, you can get some pretty firm answers to a lot of things. And so when the church just stifles it or says, no, that's just wrong, well, people are going to walk away from that. So for me anyway, the kind of ethos I would want to try and form, that we are already trying to form, is one of asking questions and not always necessarily needing to have the answer. And by that, I'm not saying there is no answer or the answer is wrong, but being comfortable with the discomfort of not knowing, but also saying, yeah, you know what, like, maybe we've been wrong on this. Maybe there is another way. Hey, so I think that exploration part, because that's what high school and college students are doing, right? And so if we don't allow that and further that, I mean, again, I did a blog post this last week that Israel's name is contends or struggles with God. Like Jacob wrestles with God or an angel and like, I'm not going to let you go till you bless me. The wrestling is blessed in our tradition. And so I would encourage the more wrestling we can invite rather than stifling or easy answers or ignoring, the more, the more people will, you hear stories of, oh, they go to college and totally leave the faith. Well, oftentimes I think it's because they've been given a polarized, it must be this or this. It's either faith or this. And they get to college and realize that this is a lot more attractive and makes a lot more sense. So they think, I have to get rid of the faith because I was told they can't mesh. And when we allow for that tension and interplay and dialogue, you no longer, when you change your opinion or the way you want to live, you don't necessarily have to leave your faith. You have a more dynamic, shifting faith. So leaving that space to me seems pretty vital.
Yeah, totally. Oh, I mean, here's the interesting thing. I can hide this now because this is we're kind of going on this, and then Rick does have one more question that we can jump into.
Yeah, that's great.
There may be so we talk about the 500-year thing, right? You and I have talked about this before. There's Reformation every 500 years, right, within the church, and all the way back, like pre-Jesus. Every 500 years, right?
Yeah.
But we're at that point. I think that there is a very strong case to be made that the Reformation this time, so the Reformation has almost always moved from a like dogma to like critical thinking. Like that's almost always the movement of the Reformation. So if you think about the schism, right, like Orthodoxy or like the Orthodox Church and the Catholic Church, that was moving from like people who thought that like no scientific things should be, no mysticism, no science should be pursued, and the Catholic Church was like, no, we should pursue those things. And then when like the Reformation, the Protestant Reformation happened, like the schism is that the Protestant Reformation is like, you're making this too narrow. Like it needs to be much wider. We all have to have the scriptures because they could mean different things to all of us. Like you're like too dogmatic. Like Martin Luther's big issue is that they like try to explain communion. He doesn't even deny that Christ is present in communion. He's just like, don't explain it. You're removing my ability to critically think about this. And so like, I almost think that the next schism is going to be like any sort of orthodoxy framework and people who reject such ideology as like that there is such a thing as orthodoxy.
So like Richard Rohr and Peter Rollins are like leading the way on that. Non-duality, pyrotheology, that kind of stuff.
Right. So Rohr and Peter Rollins and others. I mean, there are many others.
No, of course, right.
Are but they're like two of the most notable for sure, right? Those two would be what I consider to be trailing metrics, actually. So like they're both trailing the greater movement of the church. There are true, like this is the same thing with like, if you look at any of the Reformations, including like the Zwingli Luther like thing, right? Like there was a guy before Luther who tried to translate the Bible into German and he was burned at the stake. Luther comes in later, does basically the same thing, but does it much more politically savvy, right? Stephen tries to reform like the church into a Gentile accepting church, and like failed horribly and is stoned. And
so there's like Tim
Paul
Tebow to Lamar Jackson and
right,
Colin
like,
Kaepernick
right, exactly.
and those people.
Like, right, Paul comes in and like does the job, but he does it after because he's more political. So like actually to me, there are people who are ahead of Richard Rohr, who like even if I named them, I could be called a heretic, right? But like Richard Rohr, Rob Bell, Peter Rollins, like all these guys, these are trailing metric guys who are just picking up the pieces of what people like Paul Tillich. He's like one that didn't get crucified, but like Paul Tillich was doing this work, 50 years ago, 60 years ago. He was doing the work that Peter Rollins, who's saying the things that Peter Rollins was saying, that says, and that Richard Rohr says. He was doing it in such a philosophical realm that we were actually able to do it. It was actually really before the rise of what I call neo-fundamentalism. So this is just like an American church question, but I think that is going to be the next move for the church, is to move to this to some like level, and there will be, just like the Catholic Church did not go away during the Protestant Reformation, it continued to exist as a split. There will be a split between everyone and this group. But you know what? I think that most of our kids are going to go with that group.
And that group is probably going to be a lot more contemplative and mystical as well.
Yeah, most likely it's going to, as every tradition does, it's going to refer back to some of the core principles and call itself the true faith, right? And then eventually what will happen is the general church, the Catholic Church and the Protestant Church, will be reformed to mirror that in the same way that the Catholic Church today has been reformed to mirror the Protestant Church. So I think that's a lot of it, and that goes with our Halloween question as well. But that's anyway.
Yeah, that's good stuff, man. Well, let's dig into Rick's question as our last one. How do you feel about church-sponsored gambling such as bingo? So, and we've never talked about this. So,
no, never.
Gambling for me is very much like other things such as drinking alcohol, where I don't have a problem with it fundamentally unless it becomes an addiction or an idol. So, you can easily go to a baseball game and out to dinner and spend $100, right? And it's like, if you're going to spend that same 100 playing a game like bingo, then I think that's okay. I think you can very easily get in trouble with it, and then that becomes a problem. But in and of itself, I don't think gambling is an issue. So I would say something like church-sponsored bingo would be okay, but I think you have to be very careful, just like we would be very careful, which maybe this is then where you say it's not the best thing, because there are people in your community, for example, where we don't use alcohol for communion because someone who's an alcoholic, that becomes a potential stumble or a potential uninviting thing for that person. So my thing with that would be, are we in some way putting someone out or leading them to a tempting place because they've had a gambling addiction? So that's where maybe it gets kind of but in and of itself, I don't think it's a problem, but maybe from the aspect of we don't want to invite someone to get into a difficult spot, we would want to be careful.
Sure. That makes sense. Yeah. As per usual, I take the even more liberal approach, right? So like, I don't have an issue with church-sponsored gambling because here's a funny thing that my grandparents on both sides of my family, but certainly my mother's parents, Mom, if you're watching this, hashtag your parents, they would be like, gambling is a sin and is against the Bible. And my response to them, as a person who's exegeted much of the scriptural text and certainly exegeted Leviticus and the New Testament extensively, where they pull most of these ideologies or these ideas, would say gambling is not addressed in the Bible. That would be my honest take. Gambling is not addressed in the Bible. The love of money is addressed in the Bible. Which we use to say, well, then people shouldn't gamble, to which I would respond, then people also should not play the stock market. Right? Like if you, I'm not saying day trading isn't gambling. Day trading is to an extent gambling. It's gambling with increased data sources and algorithms and things that you can do a good job with. I'm not saying you can't make money that way, but if you are doing something to make money because you want money, then and you're saying that's equivalent to the love of money, then I mean, most things that we do in a capitalistic society are in violation of First Timothy.
Even just a normal job that you're making just so you can make money would then fall into that, because you're spending your time, you're trusting they're going to pay you. It's
right. Well, exactly. I mean, anything that you do for the pursuit of money, right, is a violation of that Hebrews text, that Matthew text, that First Timothy text, right?
Depending again on the intent.
Sure.
In the heart.
Sure. So you could say like, okay, teachers don't do that because teachers don't get paid enough, and they still do their job. Pastors don't do that.
Pastors, hey.
Yeah, we don't get paid enough to do our job, so therefore we, or whatever, right? We can make that claim, but 90% of people do the job that they do to get money. Like, that's part of it. So I think that's nonsense. I think that if we do, so gambling is not a sin, but for sure, the church has an important role in limiting church members, especially on their grounds, from falling back into unhealthy patterns. Right. So whether that's alcoholism, whether that's gambling, whether that's sex addiction, whatever it is. I mean, to be honest, right? Like if you're exegeting, like this sounds like pretty, like, this is pretty radical that I'm about to say this, but if you're exegeting the Old Testament in the original Hebrew and getting graphic with the way that the Bible gets graphic about sex, and you trigger someone who's a sex addict, that's on you as a pastor, right? That's on you. Like, you have to make your space a safe space, period. Right. So, do I think that churches can never serve alcohol under any circumstance? Probably not. Our church doesn't. I think that's good policy, smart policy. But you don't want to get into that, like what that could lead to. But do I think that it's like evil that St. Mike's makes $100,000 on their 50-50 raffle every year to sponsor, programs that I know serve the community well? Right. No, I don't think it is. I don't think that there are people who are going into that 50-50 raffle truly in, like, if I put my whole paycheck into this, honey, and if we win this raffle, we're going to be rich, like, that's just not, I think that it's different for them. Yeah. So do I think gambling is a problem? Of course I do, in especially in the way that it harms people. Yeah. But I would say the same thing about, having in non-COVID world, if you get 3 or 4 guys over and you play poker for $20 or something, buy-in, because you want to make it interesting. To me, that's, if everybody understands that, like, that you're paying for the entertainment, right, of it, and you don't expect to get anything out of it, and so it doesn't become an addictive right. behavior, then to me that's just okay. That's fellowship. Like, that's what it is. Yeah. So that's where I would go on that. Yeah. Certainly, if the bingo is benefiting the church, then perhaps there are people who are playing bingo who really don't want to win the money at all. They're just trying to give to that cause. So, I don't think you should pay people to go to your church. I don't think you should give out free iPads so people show up either.
Can we do that? We're making up the budget right now. We have to turn it in. Maybe that's a new item. iPads for everyone. Yeah.
Just iPads for new, like, so it's actually a Francis Chan thing. He says, he goes, if your church, he said, if I was a person of another faith and I saw a church giving out a free iPad to all new members or whatever, he was like, I would just think that your God was like really, really undesirable and weak, that you had to bribe someone with an iPad to get them to show up.
I just want an iPad. That's all I'm saying.
I know. Well, I have an iPad 2 that I inherited from my father when he passed away. And it's like at the point now where it's like, I just load like PDFs.
Yeah, because you can't update it anymore.
I can't update it anymore. So I just load PDFs whenever I have to preach. It's just like a way of preaching that's not shuffling papers.
That's awesome.
So that's my hot take. As always, Phil, final thoughts?
My final thoughts.
What's your word? What's your word of the What's your main takeaway from this here time?
What was our first question? Halloween.
Yeah.
What would my final takeaway be? I mean, I feel like we need to embrace complexity, embrace the tension. I think I've talked before about embracing mystery, but be willing to live in the tough spaces, because I think in the tough spaces where we ask those good questions, whether it's about Halloween, with our kids, with gambling, realizing the complexity of the situation, widening our perspective, and being open to wrestling until we're blessed in that thing or that situation.
Yeah. Awesome.
How about you?
Well,
do you have final thoughts?
Yeah, I have.
We'll make you really big.
Okay, I'll make. This is what we do for final thoughts. It's like the around the horn. Have you ever watched that?
That's
show?
what I was just gonna say. You need to give each other points.
So I actually want that. I really wanted that guy to host the second presidential debate.
Max Kellerman.
I thought Max Kellerman is the second presidential debate host as like an around the horn, where he just mutes people when they say dumb things, or like when they say unfact. He just mutes them if they like say something dumb, and then he gives people points for like saying good things. I was like, I need Max Kellerman to moderate this for me. Okay, I'll make myself think. So my final thought is what we were talking about, the tangent that we got on, the rabbit trail that we went down. In all of these things, there is a propensity for us to fear our own doubts, fear our children's doubts, fear secular things in culture like Halloween, try and kind of white knuckle our way through parenting, whatever that is. And my word here is don't do that. Don't be that person. Our faith is a faith that has lasted for 2,000 years. It's evolved massively. It's changed massively. We were wrong, in my opinion, we were wrong on women in ministry for the first 1,900 plus years, or at least after the first 400 years. For the next 1,500 years, we were wrong on women in ministry. The Bible was used as justification for slavery for 1,800 years. And that obviously does not flow with the witness of Scripture. Be open to the Reformation, because of what Phil said earlier, which is we are called to be the power, the force that reconciles all things, because God reconciled all things to himself through Christ Jesus, as we learn in the Bible. And so as church people, we get to participate in that work. And so that is my final thought. Be a person who participates in the reconciliation of all things without fear.
Amen to that. Sorry, I was responding to Bambi Cole. We are blessed that it is a blessing to you. So I think we're back in 2 weeks, right?
We are back in 2 weeks. Hey, Phil, what we have 30 seconds here. There's something very exciting that we are opening the church hesitantly and carefully for very limited numbers of people, to keep people connected. But the most exciting part of that actually is that Phil is going to be doing a new Zoom thing on Sunday for all of you in live world, in social media world. We are going to have a Zoom service. This is coming November 8th. Will probably be the first one, if not the following week, if we can't figure it out, but we think we got a good handle on it. So November 8th, if you love Hope at Home, if you love watching our services live on Sunday morning, if that's part of your Sunday morning routine, you now are about to be mined by all of the social connection that you will have at that. So
love it. Can't wait. Thank you guys. Yeah. We'll see you in 2 weeks. Grace and peace.
Grace and